All little girls believe in fairy tales. All children, really. For what child doesn't want to believe that magic exists just beyond the edge of the ordinary world? Clara had believed more than most. At 12 years old, she'd traveled to a land filled with candy and toys and fallen in love with a handsome king who promised to return for her. Most children grow to learn that there's a line between imagination and delusion. Clara didn't manage to learn it in time. She'd held on to her belief too long, spoken her truth too loudly, until finally they'd forced her into a place with white walls and barred windows, a place where there were no happy endings. Luckily for Clara, though, her king wasn't done with her, not even close. And on a freezing December morning, 20 years after a 12-year-old girl had promised to wait for him, he was about to remind her exactly what she'd been told to forget by crashing her wedding. Chapter 1. There were far more people in the church than Clara had expected. After all, today was Christmas Eve, a busy time for everyone, when most families preferred to stay home, preparing for the holiday, rather than witness the wedding of an unremarkable woman. And Clara was nothing if not unremarkable. She was an old spinster of 32, someone no one had ever imagined would finally get married, least of all after having been to that place. Not everyone knew Clara had spent time in an institution, of course. Her family had been careful to keep the details quiet, but enough people remembered the strange girl she'd been growing up, and she was still seen as the odd one, the cuckoo. Poor mad Clara. So no one had expected her to marry. That's why they'd come, Clara realized, reading the shock on their faces as she'd walked in. Half pity, half morbid curiosity. They'd come to witness the spectacle of crazy Clara actually managing to snag a husband. They couldn't quite believe it was happening, and they were about to believe it even less. Because if almost no one had expected Clara to get married on Christmas Eve, then certainly not a single soul could have anticipated that a king would crash through those church doors, kidnap her from the altar, and claim her as his. But we're getting ahead of ourselves right now. Clara stood at the end of the aisle, her gloved fingers hooked through the crook of her father's elbow. The cold ate into the skin of her arms, slicing through the thin, white gauze of her wedding dress sleeves. "You'll look beautiful," her mother had said, her voice tight. What she'd meant was, "You'll look normal. Please, for once, just look normal." The sea of faces turned toward her looked as stony and cold as the frozen winter morning. Clara tried to take a step and found she couldn't. Her feet had rooted themselves to the ancient stone floor. "Breathe, child," her father murmured, his voice gentler than she'd heard it in years. "Just breathe." She did as he said, unsteady, shaking, but obedient. Always obedient now. She managed to put one foot in front of the other. The wedding march played, though she noted it wasn't played with any real gusto. She was grateful at least for the veil covering her face. Better they think she was overcome with bridal emotion rather than drowning in shame. For if she was grateful someone was willingly marrying her, despite her being the truth was that she didn't think she really loved Philip. Though given her circumstances, she knew that didn't matter. She walked past a kindly aunt, one who'd always brought her sweets as a child. The woman's eyes brimmed with tears, her voice shaking with emotion, as she whispered to her companion, "I'm just so relieved she's found someone normal to take her. He'll keep her grounded." Clara gritted her teeth. The snow always set her on edge, as did Christmas, which was only a day away. When she was a child, she'd loved Christmas, the magic of it, the possibility. But now Christmas and the feeling of snow flurrying around her brought back the worst memories of her life. Windows with bars on them, her own screams echoing through chemical-smelling halls. She shuddered, forcing the memories back into their locked box. She'd left all that behind her. Today marked the next stage in her life, one of calm and peace. One of being normal. She'd reached the end of the aisle where the priest and Philip waited for her. Clara couldn't help but notice how her father's shoulders relaxed as he placed her hand into Philip's. Not my problem anymore, she imagined him thinking. Clara had always had an active imagination. Her parents had told her so repeatedly, often with that worried crease between their brows. Dearly beloved, the priest began, his voice sonorous in the cold church air. Clara struggled to focus on the words. They seemed to come from very far away, as if she were underwater. Philip had a kind face. She reminded herself of this. He held her hands gently. She felt incredibly grateful to him. He'd promised her a quiet life, and that was all Clara wanted anymore. To be left alone, to be safe. She forced herself to zone back into what was happening around her. Focus. Be present. Be normal. And if any person can show just cause why they may not be joined together, the priest eyed, his words echoing off the vaulted ceiling. Let them speak now or forever. Hold their peace. Silence. Of course, there was silence. Who would object? Everyone wanted this marriage. Her family needed it. She needed it. It was the answer. To the church's double doors slammed open, with a sound like a gunshot. Snow and wind burst in a flurry of white that seemed to carry its own light. And with it came a man. No, not just a man. No, a mountain of a man. Broad-shouldered and powerful, covered in thick furs that made him look like something out of a storybook. But it was his face that stole Clara's breath. He was the most exquisite man she had ever seen. Strong jaw, high cheekbones, eyes that burned with an intensity she could feel even from across the church. Dark hair fell around his face, touched with snow. He looked wild and untamed and completely out of place in this proper English church. He looked like, I object. The stranger's voice rang out, deep and commanding, filling every corner of the church. Everyone in attendance jumped to their feet, shouting, gasping, demanding explanations. Her mother let out a small shriek. Her father was already moving toward the stranger, his face red with outrage. Philip's grip on her hands tightened painfully. But Clara stood perfectly still, unable to move. You object? She heard her father ask, affronted. And on what grounds? The beautiful man smirked, looked up, his gaze landing on her. On the grounds, he said, his eyes never leaving hers, that Clara already belongs to me. And somewhere, buried deep in that locked box in Clara's mind, a part of her long-forgotten screamed, yes. Chapter 2. It felt like a dream. Clara knew that uproar filled the church. She could hear the shouting, see mouths opening in shock and outrage, but none of it seemed to touch the stranger. He was striding down the aisle as if the world bent around him to accommodate his passage, and impossibly the snow still flurried around him as he walked, as if he'd brought winter itself inside the church. Clara felt like there was a thread in her belly, and the other end was tied directly to him, to that man. And with each step he took closer, that thread pulled tighter, reeling her in. It made very little sense. Who are you? She murmured silently amongst the chaos. The snow, the furs, his confident movements, it was all so familiar. Then his eyes, brilliant blue, sharp as winter ice, locked onto hers, and for a heartbeat, 2, 3, they simply stared at each other across the chaos of the church. Clara is mine, he repeated, a command that silenced the church. She's always been mine. The spell shattered. Like an electric shock straight to her brain, Clara was suddenly terrified. This had to be another delusion, just like the ones she'd had when she was younger, the ones she'd been locked away for. Her illness was back. She was going crazy again. Philip, she called. Her voice came out meek and uncertain as she moved behind her fiancé. It couldn't be real, she decided. But then the stranger's eyes found hers again, his mouth curving and a smile so warm it could have melted the snow still swirling around him. What could this beautiful, powerful man possibly want with her? No, this had to be a dream. Men like him weren't real. Philip stepped between them, puffing his chest out in what might have been bravery if his hands weren't visibly shaking. "Now see here," he attempted. "You can't just—" The stranger unsheathed his sword. "Step aside, mouse," he growled through what looked like pointed teeth. Philip practically dove sideways. So now Clara stood alone, the stranger advancing on her with that same confident stride. Her eyes darted around wildly, looking for something, anything to defend herself with. In desperation, she bent down and yanked off one of her wedding shoes. The delicate white satin slipper felt ridiculous in her hand, but it was all she had. With all her strength, she hurled it at the man's head. He sidestepped it easily, effortlessly, and the delight that crossed his face was almost insulting. "You're just as I remember, my Clara," he said, his voice rich with genuine pleasure. "Well, except you're all grown up now." He added this last part with distinct approval, his eyes sweeping over her in a way that made heat bloom in her cheeks. His hand shot out and caught her elbow, not painfully, but firmly, inexorably. "Unhand me, you brute," Clara yelped. The stranger gave a growly laugh that sent shivers down her spine. But not the bad kind, a devilish expression crossing those impossibly handsome features. Clara gulped. "That's it," he murmured, his voice dropping to something intimate that made her skin flush. "Show me that fire." Before Clara could process those words, the approval in them, the heat, he moved, sweeping her up in his arms, cradling her against his chest, like a bride. Like his bride. "Put me down." Clara shrieked. "Put me down this instant." "As you wish, my love," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice, even as her family's shouts grew louder behind them. Just not here. The world dissolved into a swirl of magic and snow. When Clara's vision cleared, everything had changed. They were outside now, her thin remaining shoe crunched in crisp snow. The air was sharp and fresh in her lungs. Her captor slowly lowered her to her feet. But he left no room between them. "Are you all right?" he asked, cupping her cheek gently. He was so warm despite the winter air, solid and real and familiar. Their breaths misted together in the cold air, and Clara had to tilt her head back to look up at him. His eyes were like winter skies, blue and intense, and fixed entirely on her. "You don't remember me yet," he said softly, "but you will, my love." Then he stroked his thumb across her cheek, and an image arose, blurry and dreamlike. More a sense of déjà vu than anything concrete. She'd been in this man's arms before, but when she remembered, dancing round and round in circles, spinning until the world blurred. His deep laugh sounded in her ears as they whirled. Then the memory shifted, and she was twirling in front of her mother. "He's so magical," young Clara said. Her face split with a grin so wide it hurt. "Mother, you should see him. He's—" Another shift. She was older now, a teenager, dancing again, but in the arms of her father at some formal ball. "He told me to wait for him." Teenage Clara whispered urgently. "Please, father, don't make me break my promise. He's going to come back, you'll see." One more lurch forward in time. She was 21 years old, fighting with her parents in her bedroom. They were trying to yank something out of her hands, something small and wooden, but she was holding tight. "It's not real, Clara," her mother shouted, tears streaming down her face. "It's just a toy. Give it to me." "No," Clara screamed back. "He's real. He's coming back for me. Clara," a deep male voice interrupted. "Are you all right?" The present crashed back in with dizzying force. Clara's world tilted violently. She couldn't tell if she was 21 or 32, if she was in her bedroom or in the snow, if this man was real, or if she'd finally irrevocably lost her mind. "Clara," he probed gently. Her mouth was too dry to reply. The edges of her vision were going dark, tunneling down until all she could see was his beautiful, impossible face. A face she'd loved with all her heart, one that couldn't possibly be real. "I've got you," she heard him murmur. "I've always got you, my love. It was the last thing she heard before she fainted in his arms. Chapter 3. Clara's eyes blinked open. Twinkling snow flurried and settled around her, each flake catching the light like tiny diamonds. She closed her eyes again, certain a dream was still clinging to her consciousness. But when she peeked them open once more, the impossible world around her remained. She pushed herself up to sitting, her mouth dropping open in awe. Giant red and white candy canes towered around her like ancient pillars, each one taller than 3 men standing on each other's shoulders. And despite the snow glittering like icing on a wedding cake, she wasn't cold. She poked her tongue out and giggled in disbelief when she caught a falling flake. It was sweet. It was icing sugar. Rising unsteadily to her feet, she took in more of her surroundings. Around her stood rows of toys, miniature toy soldiers with rosy cheeks, mechanical dancers, gingerbread men with gumdrop buttons. Then she saw him, the man who'd taken her. The icing sugar snow settled in his dark hair, and she thought, he looks good enough to eat, before remembering he'd taken her here against her will. Much more important information. What's happening? Clara asked him, taking a cautious step back. Where have you taken me? Seeing her retreat, the man pouted and stopped in his tracks. You've been here before, he said, his voice gentle but certain. In my cursed realm, you were 12 and you promised that you'd wait for me. Clara almost choked. That doesn't make any sense, she said. And even if it were true, you can't very well expect a 12-year-old to keep their promise. His mouth curved into a smile that made her stomach flip. You were quite adamant, Clara. Of course I believed you. He paused, adding with astounding sincerity, I'd trust you with my life, even at 12. Clara shook her head, taken aback. He sounded so earnest. That can't be, she said. Besides, this place, I'd remember if I'd been here. It is rather memorable. She gestured at the gingerbread men, making her kidnappers snort. Let me show you around, he said, extending his hand. Perhaps it will help you remember. He started walking toward her, each step deliberate and unhurried. Clara found herself backing up until her shoulders hit something solid. A candy cane, she realized distantly. Please, Clara, he asked with eyes that held such hope that Clara found herself smiling before she could think better of it. Who are you? She asked, placing her hand in his. You know who I am? He replied, making her frown. I don't actually, she insisted. That's rather the problem, you see. You say we're mates. You call me love. Yet I don't even know your name. This gave the man pause. He stopped, observed her, cocking his head. What do you think my name is? He asked eventually, something playful in the question. Despite everything, the impossibility of this place, the fear still humming under her skin, the complete insanity of her situation, Clara found herself oddly charmed. Handsome kidnapper, she joked. His answering laugh was the kind that made her want to hear it again. I'll take it, he said good-naturedly. Come on. First, they stopped at a massive gingerbread house. It stood 3 stories tall, with frosting piped along every edge and windows made of clear sugar. When you were here, when you were 12, the man said, I had to stop you from eating an entire house. It was clearly meant as a joke, but Clara was too astonished to laugh. She stared at the house, trying to find any fragment of memory, any recognition, but nothing came. So her handsome kidnapper pulled her gently onward through a whole forest made of towering red and white candy canes. You danced your way through this forest for hours, he said, his thumb absently stroking the back of her hand. Something in Clara softened. She did used to love dancing. Amazing, she breathed. They walked on, and she found herself relaxing degree by degree. The world around them was so beautiful, so impossible, that it felt easier to simply accept it than to fight against the evidence of her own eyes. And her companion made it feel safe somehow. When they came across a river of molten chocolate, The smell was so incredible that Clara's stomach audibly rumbled, and he laughed, delighted. "You've not changed too much, my Clara. You almost drowned herself trying to drink it last time," he joked. Clara found herself laughing too, more relaxed now. "It smells so delicious," she said. "Then allow me," her companion replied. When he released her hand, she felt the loss of his warmth immediately. But her disappointment didn't last long. He snapped off the heads of 2 sugar daffodils growing by the riverbank and used them as cups, dipping one into the chocolate river and handing it to her with a slight bow. The chocolate was rich and warm and absolutely the most delicious thing Claire had ever tasted. "This has to be real," she thought. "I can taste it." Eventually, they came to a beautiful fountain made of glittering lilac sponge sugar. Water, or something like water, flowed through its elaborate tiers, each drop catching the light like an amethyst. Clara dipped her finger into it and brought it to her lips. The sugar tasted like plums, sweet and tart and perfect. When she turned to look at her companion, she found him watching her intently as she sucked the treat from her finger. She blushed instantly under his gaze. "Don't be embarrassed," he laughed. "You're free to taste anything you'd like." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't. With his thumb, he caught a bit of spun sugar from her bottom lip and brought it to his own mouth. His eyes never left hers. Clara thought she might melt into the fountain. "Is this real?" she breathed. "Are you real?" "Real? Yes," he said, "but under a curse." He gestured to the sugar wonderland around them. "This whole realm is trapped under it. It's why I couldn't come find you sooner." Clara blinked. She didn't feel like a prisoner. In fact, she felt more like her true self than she had in months, maybe years. "It's just being with you. It feels so," she searched for her words. "So easy, so right, like I've known you forever." She stared at him, really looked at him. The blue eyes, the dark hair with snow melting in it, the way he called her his Clara. A flash of memory, brief but vivid, surfaced. She was smaller, younger, her hand tiny in his much larger one, looking up at him with complete trust. Him patting her head warmly, smiling down at her. "Your name," she murmured. "It's Soren, isn't it? Your name is Soren." His face transformed, that brilliant smile breaking across his features like sunrise. "Yes," he whispered, sounding so relieved that it made Clara's chest tight. "Yes, it is." Clara wanted to cry, caught in a whirlwind of emotions. "And I do know you, don't I?" she asked, searching his expression. "Somehow I know you." "You do." Soren reached for her hand again, cradling it between both of his. "And there's more you need to know." Clara's heart began to race as he went on, growing serious. "If it feels this way, so easy, so right between us, it's because of what we are to each other." "And what is that?" Clara asked, confused. "In my true form, I'm not just a man," Soren said. "I'm a shifter, a wolf." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "A king?" "A king," Clara repeated, bewildered. But he just went on, as if that detail was inconsequential. "My kind all have soulmates. Clara fated mates that complete us, that we're bound to across time and distance and even death." He lifted her hand to his lips. "And you are mine, my destined mate," he said, the words heavy with meaning. "Clara, you're the only one who can break my curse." Just at that moment, the ground around them quaked violently. The fountain shattered, covering them both in sticky spun sugar and plum-flavored water. Soren was on his feet in an instant, his sword already drawn. "They found us." Clara looked up and yelped. Pouring from between the candy canes, emerging from behind gingerbread houses, swarming from every direction were mice. Their eyes glowed red in the candy-colored light. And before Clara's horrified eyes, one of them began to change, its body stretching and twisting, until a man stood where the creature had been. This mouse just turned into a human. She screamed uselessly. "Yes," Soren nodded. "They're shifters, too, except they turn into mice, not wolves." Clara gaped. This couldn't be happening. This sounded like a bad joke or a children's story. But no matter what it sounded like, the mice were still coming. Chapter 4. The mouse horde paused as if waiting for something. Clara held her breath. Beside her, she could hear Saren's ragged breathing. Feel the tension radiating from his body. The mouse, who had shifted into male form, threw back his head and shouted, "Grab the girl." Chaos descended. Saren's growl of rage was inhuman, and then it became actually inhuman as he transformed before her eyes. His body stretched and reformed, bones cracking and muscle rippling, until a magnificent black wolf stood where the man had been. His fur was stark against the sugar snow, his teeth bared in a snarl that promised violence. But mice were everywhere, swirling like a storm around them. Clara stumbled backward as Saren threw back his head and howled, a sound so primal and commanding that it seemed to shake the very air. In response, a horde of his own appeared. Toy soldiers, hundreds of them, marched into the fray with their shiny bayonets raised and their painted faces set in determined expressions. They might have been small, but they moved with deadly precision. In her heart, Clara knew she should be terrified. After all, the mice were after her. But Saren was a vicious protector. And now, with the aid of the toy soldiers, no mouse was getting anywhere near her. She stood in the center of a protective circle, chest heaving, watching the battle unfold. Saren and the toy soldiers were clearly the more effective warriors. They tore every mouse down with brutal efficiency. However, there were just so many mice. No matter how many fell, more kept coming, pouring from the candy cane forest like an endless tide. Clara gritted her teeth, growing increasingly frustrated. A mouse slipped through a gap in the toy soldier barrier. The painted warriors didn't notice it streaking toward Clara, its red eyes fixed on her with hungry intent. Clara stumbled backward and fell, her hand landing on something cold and metal. Saren's discarded sword. She scrambled to her feet, barely able to lift the weight of it. The blade wavered in her grip, far too heavy for her untrained arms. But when the mouse leaped for her throat, Clara swung with everything she had. The blade connected with a satisfying thunk, sending the creature flying sideways into the fountain. Yes, Clara threw her fist into the air, elated. Then her eyes locked on Saren, just in time to see another mouse approaching him from behind, while he was engaged with 3 others in front. Coward, she thought. Without thinking, Clara dropped the sword and grabbed a nearby piece of candy cane that had been shattered in the battle. It was thick as her forearm and jagged at one end. She hurled it with all her strength. It struck the cowardly mouse square in the head, knocking him unconscious mid-leap. Saren noticed the mouse fall behind him, then spotted the candy cane piece. When his blue eyes, still wolf-bright and wild, met Clara's across the battlefield, it was as if the whole fight froze in time. His eyes held hers with fierce intensity. Then, he jerked his massive wolf head toward the forest behind them. A clear command, run. But Clara didn't run away. Instead, she picked up the other half of the giant broken candy cane and started jabbing her way through the horde, staying close to Saren's flank. He trusted her to keep up, to protect his blind spots. And Clara found herself rising to meet that trust. She felt alive in a way she hadn't for years, maybe ever. The wolf-sworn fought beside her, his powerful jaws snapping, his claws tearing through the mouse army. Together, they carved a path through the swarm. Then they ran through the candy cane forest, Clara's bare feet crunching on sugar snow. Behind them, the mouse army gave chase, their squeals echoing through the striped pillars. But finally, they burst through the forest and came to a giant castle. It rose from the sugar snow like something from a storybook. All spires and turrets, made of what looked like hardened caramel, with windows of spun sugar. Catching the fading light, they ran through the open gate. The moment they crossed the threshold, an iron portcullis dropped behind them with a resounding clang. Clara leaned against the castle wall to catch her breath. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Her wedding dress was torn and stained. She'd lost her remaining shoes somewhere in the forest, and she'd never felt more herself. Beside her, the great black wolf panted heavily, his tongue lolling, his blue eyes so unmistakably Soren, even in this form, watched her with concern and pride. Chapter 5. Inside the castle, Clara stood before a fireplace so enormous she could have walked into it without ducking. Sauron had disappeared briefly after they'd entered, the wolf vanishing behind a carved sugar door. When he emerged moments later, he was human again, dressed in simple clothes. He guided her to a plush velvet chair near the hearth and knelt before her, procuring a small basin of water and clean cotton. He dampened one piece and brought it to the scratch on her cheek. This close she could see flecks of silver in his blue eyes, and it did things to her, ignited a fire within her heart she'd thought long extinguished. "I was a fool, Clara," Sauron said quietly, almost ruefully. "I live by duty and honor. Foolishly, I always expected others to do the same." He dabbed at her cheek again, his movements careful and precise. "Centuries ago, there was a princess in a neighboring kingdom. Pippat was her name. She was beautiful beyond measure, but vain and cruel in equal proportion." His jaw tightened. Sauron brought her to stand before an enormous portrait hanging above a side entrance. Clara stared up at the woman depicted there. She was breathtakingly beautiful. Golden hair, perfect features, elaborate gown. "That's her," Sauron said quietly. "Princess Pirat, the one who cursed me." Clara studied the portrait, that cold, beautiful face. "And you kept her portrait in your castle?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "I like to throw darts at it," Sauron replied seriously, making her laugh before continuing. "She committed crimes against the Mouse Queen, killed her children in a fit of spite over some petty slight. They'd broken her Nutcracker toy. So the Mouse Queen transformed her into one half-human, half-deformed Nutcracker. Hideous." Clara found herself leaning forward slightly. Pipat's father was desperate. He sent word to every kingdom, begging for help. The curse could only be broken by someone who truly loved her, who would marry her despite what she'd become. Soren sat down, the cotton, and met Clara's eyes. "I was young, idealistic. I believed in the power of duty and honor above all else. I thought my commitment would be enough, that offering myself in service to break an unjust curse would count as the love required. But it didn't," Clara asked softly. "No." Soren's expression grew bitter. "When the moment came, when I stood at the altar ready to fulfill my promise, she refused me. For the curse had already started to lift due to my commitment. You see, she said I was half-beast and that she would never bind herself to someone so beneath her." Clara's breath caught. "But if the curse was breaking," she began, "it was half-broken." Soren said, "The magic was unstable, and it fell onto me, onto my entire kingdom." He gestured around them at the Candy Castle, the sugar snow still falling outside the windows, the impossible Toyland realm, everyone I'm sworn to protect. Every member of my pack, my court, my people, they're all trapped here, frozen as toys and sweets, living but not truly alive. Soren rose from his knees and moved to sit in the chair opposite Clara's, though he didn't go far. "Only my mate can break the curse, and because I'm stuck in time, she reincarnates across lifetimes," he said, his voice dropping to something intimate and raw. "I've been searching for you for centuries, Clara. Lifetimes where I never found you in time, or where you died before we could meet, or where I was trapped in Nutcracker form and couldn't reach you." Clara held her breath. "Then 20 years ago you found me," Soren said, taking her hand. "You were here, stumbling through my land like you'd fallen through a dream. The second I saw you, I knew. I knew it was you, Clara. His eyes searched hers, desperate for her to understand. But you were only a child, 12 years old. He shook his head. I couldn't claim you then, when you were too innocent to understand what that meant. So we explored my kingdom together, and when it was time for you to go home, you promised me. You said you'd wait for me. You said you'd keep the Nutcracker toy safe until I could transform again, which is only possible every 10 years on Christmas Eve. Clara's head felt light, like she might float away if she wasn't sitting down. Memories swirled around her like the cursed sugar snow, fragmented, half-formed, things she'd tried so hard to forget. I looked for you 10 years later. Saren continued, leaning forward. When you were 22, old enough, ready, but I couldn't find you anywhere. Clara froze. Her entire body went rigid. I searched desperately that entire Christmas Eve night, but you were just gone. Saren insisted, trying to meet her gaze, trying to understand the shift in her expression. Clara felt numb. Her throat tightened until she could barely breathe. I was in an institution, she murmured, the words barely audible. There was a beat of silence. An institution? Saren asked, confusion clear in his voice. Clara had a flashback. White walls, barred windows, the smell of carbolic soap and bitter medicine. The sound of her own voice from screaming that it was all real, that Saren was real, that she wasn't crazy. It's a place where people go when they're insane, she said, her voice hollow, so they can recover. Insane, Saren repeated, affronted. But why would they send you somewhere for people who... He paused. His eyes widened briefly. Clara, he said softly, reaching for her hand. She blinked away tears that had gathered without her permission. Most people never come out of there, she said, looking at their joined hands. Once they think you're crazy, it's almost impossible to prove to them that you're not. And my parents knew that. But they sent me anyway. Saren's face crumpled. He bowed his head over her hand, bringing it to his lips. When he looked up at her again, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry, Clara. I should have thought of that. I should have told you to keep it a secret. I should have protected you better. This is my fault. No, Clara said quietly. But though she didn't withdraw her hand from his, her mind was already drifting. In her head, she could see the Nutcracker toy, wooden and painted, with a kind face and a soldier's uniform. She remembered dancing with it, spinning around her bedroom. But the memory felt more like a dream she'd once had than something real. The weight of everything crashed back down on her. Everyone has been telling me I was crazy since I was 12, she murmured. And now you're telling me it was all real. And I want to believe you, Saren. I do. But I don't. It sounds too good to be true, is what she didn't say. It sounds like the hope she'd long learned to bury, and the dreams that died with her the day they locked her up. You were never insane, Clara. Saren turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. They made you doubt yourself, doubt me, but I never doubted us for a second. Not 20 years ago, not 10 years ago, not now. He sounded so certain, so absolutely convinced, and Clara was filled with an overwhelming desire to fall into his arms, to believe him, because she'd felt this before. This certainty, this joy, this feeling of finally being right, and every single time she'd been punished for it. If she knew one thing with absolute certainty, it was that she couldn't go back. She couldn't go back to her parents' rejection, to the doctor's judgment, the days of isolation in dark rooms. She would rather die than go back. And this feeling of rightness, of love, this was exactly the kind of delusion that would send her back. I can't. Clara pulled away, wrapping her arms around herself. Saren, this is a breakdown, and even if it isn't, she interrupted herself, really wishing it wasn't, that it was all real. I'm getting married, she said in a weak voice. I have a life. Saren's expression shifted to urgent desperation. When Clara actually yanked her fingers from his grasp, when he felt her slipping away, the words burst out of him without thought. "Clara, your fiancé's lying to you?" Clara's breath caught. "What?" she asked. Panic flooded her system. Real visceral panic that made her hands shake and her vision narrow. "Why would you say that to me?" she asked, backing away. "Philip is a good man. My parents were so relieved when he asked me, an old spinster, to marry. He's the Mouse King." Sarin interrupted, looking immediately like he regretted it. There was a pause. "The Mouse King?" Clara squeaked, feeling dizzy. She moved away from Sarin, pacing the grand hall, clutching at her hair. This was it. This was her mind finally completely shattering. "My fiancé is a Mouse King," she gasped, her heart rate painful. "And my Nutcracker toy can turn into a man who can turn into a wolf who's loved me for decades. I know it seems like a lot." Sarin attempted. "This can't be happening again." She gasped out, her chest tight. "I need to wake up. I need to snap out of it." Tears began streaming down her face. "I can't go back there. I won't be locked away again." Sarin caught her by the shoulders, holding her steady, forcing her to look at him. "You're not going anywhere." He spoke each word distinctly, willing her to hear him. "You're not crazy, Clara. You're not broken." Clara pretty much melted in his grip, sobbing. "You say that, but how could I be the mate of a king? Me, the problem child who sees things that aren't there." "You are everything," Sarin said, and the devastation in his voice nearly broke her. "You are brave and fierce and true. You are my mate, my Clara." She wanted to believe him. She'd never wanted anything more in her entire life. And that's how she knew it couldn't be true. They'd warned her against it, the relapse, the comforting alternative of the delusion, so much more appealing than her reality. "Let me go," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, you have to let me go." Soren's face crumbled. His expression was raw, unguarded, pure heartbreak written across every line of his face. "I don't know how to convince you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what else to say. Not when everything I come up with seems to cause you more pain." The sight of Soren, so heartbroken before her, made Clara sob even harder. This was the kind of love she would never truly know, because love likeness didn't exist. And if she let herself believe it, if she let herself have this happiness, even for a moment, the fall would destroy her completely when reality came crashing back in. Better to protect her heart now. "I'm sorry," she choked out. Clara felt the world tilt. Darkness rushed in at the edges of her vision. The last thing she felt was Sarin catching her as she collapsed. Chapter 6. When Clara's eyes peeled open again, she half expected to see Sarin's concerned face hovering over hers. Instead, she saw familiar floral wallpaper, pale pink roses on cream, faded with age. She was in her own bed, in her childhood bedroom at her parents' house. Snow fell gently outside, each flake drifting past the window like a whisper. Then Philip was at her side, taking her hand. The touch was familiar, practiced, but her heart wished desperately it was another hand offering comfort. "What happened?" Clara's voice came out, croaky, rough. "You fainted at the wedding, darling," Philip explained. "The stress of it all, I suspect. Don't fret, though. We've postponed the ceremony to tomorrow. Well, to later today, technically, Christmas Day." He smiled what Clara thought was meant to be reassuring, but a voice at the back of her mind, that dangerous voice she'd loaned to silence. "I'm very sorry for any disruption, but I can't assist with that request." That made sense. She'd had a dream, that's all. The alternative, that she'd actually been kidnapped to a magical realm by a wolf-shifter king who claimed she was his soulmate. That was insane. A knock at her bedroom door made Clara drop her hands. Her mother entered, carrying a cup of tea on a delicate saucer. "Here, darling, for your nerves," she said, handing her the cup. "How are you feeling?" Clara knew she had to choose her words carefully. "A little confused," she said. Her mother nodded, biting her bottom lip. "A nervous habit Clara had inherited. That's to be expected. It's essential you rest. The wedding is later today, and we need you well." Clara stared down at her tea, watching steam curl up from the surface. "Mom, when I was little," she hesitated, "what made you think it was a good idea to lock me up in that place?" Her mother tensed. "Honey, we talked about this," she began. "No, we haven't," Clara said. "Not since I came out. And when I came out, everything from before was blurry, including the very reason why I was locked up to begin with." "I wish you wouldn't say it like that," her mother said, looking away. "Like what?" Clara frowned. "Locked up," her mother repeated. "You make it sound so medieval, gloomy." Clara held back a scoff. It had been gloomy, to say the least. It had been terrifying, isolating. "So why did you send me there?" she said softly. Her mother's face crumpled slightly. She sat on the edge of Clara's bed, setting down the tea. "You were 12 when it started. That Christmas when you received the Nutcracker toy." Her mother's voice grew distant with memory. "At first, we thought it was just imagination. You'd always had such a vivid one. But then you started insisting he was real, that you traveled to a magical kingdom." Clara's breath caught. Flashes of memory, not dreams, but memories, flickered through her mind. "You wouldn't let go of that toy," her mother continued. "You slept with it, ate with it, talked to it for hours, and when we tried to suggest it was just pretend, you became distressed. By the time you were 15, you were still waiting for him, still insisting it was all real. The doctor said it was a break from reality, that if we didn't intervene." She trailed off, tears in her eyes. "Don't give the Nutcracker another thought," she said finally. "The doctor said stress could trigger relapses." Her eyes pleaded with Clara to understand. Clara forced herself to nod slowly. "You're right," she said quietly. "It seems so foreign now." Relief flooded her mother's features. "What happened to it?" Clara asked, hiding her clenched fists beneath the blanket. "Did you throw it away?" Her mother was clearly taken back by the question. "It's at your grandmother's old house, I believe." She reached out and took Clara's free hand, squeezing it. "Clara, I'm worried about you. Leave it in the past, darling. Tomorrow, today rather, your future begins. A good future, a normal one." She patted Clara's hand one more time and left, leaving Clara to swallow grief so profound it made her chest ache. So, it was true. She was crazy. Had always been crazy. Sarin was just a stress-induced hallucination. She should be relieved. Relieved that she'd so quickly fought off her relapse. Relieved that she could still marry Philip. But all she felt was hollow, empty, like something vital had been carved out of her chest. Clara set down her untouched tea and pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. Tears slipped down her cheeks. She didn't bother wiping them away. And then she heard the doorbell chime downstairs. "Oh, I'm so happy you could join us." She heard her mother's voice, bright and welcoming. "Of course, you're welcome to stay in our home." Curious despite her grief, Clara crept out of her bedroom and moved to the top of the stairs. A voice drifted up, cultured, refined, but with an edge like frost. "I wished I could have been at the ceremony, but I was waylaid by the snow," it said. "Thank heavens it's been moved. It's for the best, really. Now I shall see my darling brother say his vows in person." Clara strained to get a glimpse of their mystery guest. She leaned forward and her footstep made the top step creak. Her mother spotted her immediately. "Ah, Clara, you're out of bed. Come. Philip's sister has arrived." Sister. Clara didn't remember Philip mentioning a sister, or perhaps only once in passing. Clara padded silently down the stairs as her mother took the woman's coat. All Clara could see was the woman's back, an elegant figure in a deep blue traveling dress, golden hair pinned in an elaborate style. She was just stepping off the bottom step when the woman abruptly turned to face her. Time seemed to stop. The golden hair, the perfect features, the cold, calculating eyes. Clara knew this woman. It was the woman from the painting that Sarin had shown her, the portrait hanging in his castle. The woman standing in front of her now, Philip's sister, was Princess Parrot. Chapter 7. The woman's eyes swept over Clara with icy assessment, taking her measure. Then, just as quickly, her expression transformed into a wide, warm smile. "How lovely to finally meet Philip's bride," she exclaimed. But Clara had seen that first look. That flash of cold calculation. This was Princess Pipette. She'd seen her portrait mere hours ago. When she closed her eyes, she remembered it perfectly. How could she dream of it, imagine it, when she'd never met Philip's sister before? Did that mean her heart began to hurt in her chest? Could there be hope? Could Saren be real? Everything he'd said back there in the Cursed Kingdom, was that real? If so, Clara had left him there alone and heartbroken. She tensed, tried to keep her calm. One thing for sure, she had to keep a close eye on Perlipat, Philip's sister, whatever her name was. If this newcomer was indeed the princess who'd gotten Saren curse, surely her being there wasn't a coincidence. Clara forced herself to move to act normal, even as her mind raced. "Thank you so much for coming," she exclaimed, stepping off the bottom stairs. "Philip will be so pleased." Clara hoped desperately that the princess couldn't sense her thundering heartbeat. Couldn't feel how her hands shook. Was she a shifter too? Saren hadn't said, but Perlipat seemed to hate being touched. She pulled away quickly, smoothing down her dress with a delicate shudder. Right. Clara needed to be smart about this. She'd been fooled before. Fooled into thinking her truth was delusion. Fooled into doubting herself. This time, she needed evidence. Real, undeniable proof before she did anything rash. And she needed it sooner than later. While her mother, oblivious to the danger, invited Perlipat into their sitting room for tea, Clara excused herself to get dressed. In her room, she threw off her nightdress and pulled on a thick wool dress as quickly as possible. She didn't want to miss the opportunity to observe Philip and Perlipat together. She flew out of her room, but stopped dead at the top of the stairs. That cold voice was whispering below, hushed but harsh, each word clipped with barely controlled fury. Clara crept down the stairs and peered between the banister spindles. There, huddled by the front door away from where Clara's mother was preparing tea, stood her fiancé and the princess. Philip's face was pale, almost gray. Pipette looked furious, her pretty face twisted with rage that made her ugly despite her perfect features. "Incompetent fool," Pipette hissed. "How did you let Saren escape?" "The girl helped him," Philip whispered back, his voice tight with fear. "She fought back. We weren't expecting." "I don't care about your excuses." Pipette's voice could have cut glass. "Find him. He should be a Nutcracker again by now, vulnerable. Bring him to me, and I'll destroy him for good. My curse will be lifted forever, and his kingdom will be yours and your descendants to keep, as it has been for centuries." Clara's stomach dropped. This couldn't be an auditory hallucination, right? The princess had really just said what she just heard her say. Philip nodded frantically. Then, right before Clara's disbelieving eyes, he began to change. His body shrank and twisted, bones cracking softly. Fur sprouted across his skin. His face elongated into a snout with twitching whiskers. Within seconds, a gray mouse stood where her fiancé had been. Clara pressed her lips hard against the banister to muffle her gasp of shock. "Your fiancé is the Mouse King," Saren had said. The mouse that had been Philip scurried out through a crack in the door, disappearing into the snowy evening. Pipette straightened her dress, her face smoothing back into that false, warm expression. She turned and glided into the sitting room to join Clara's mother while Clara sat frozen. It was all real. Every impossible thing was real, which meant Saren was real, that his curse was real, and that he was in danger. Clara stood on shaking legs, determination replacing shock. She was done doubting herself, done letting other people tell her what was real and what wasn't. She knew the truth now, and she wasn't going to let fear stop her from acting on it. She had a king to save. Chapter 8. Clara rushed through the snow outside. Her heavy breaths misted in the air as she ran, weaving between lampposts and frost-covered fences. She burst through a group of Christmas carolers singing Silent Night, their startled faces blurring past her. Apologies, she called back, not stopping. Her lungs burned, her legs ached. But finally, she came to her grandmother's abandoned old house at the edge of town. It loomed against the dark sky, its windows like empty eye sockets, staring down at her. Clara threw open the unlocked front door and ran inside. The house was grim, covered in dust and cobwebs thick as lace, but she didn't have time to be frightened, forcing her tired legs onward, ignoring the way her whole body shook with cold and adrenaline. Clara climbed the spiral staircase until she reached the attic door and shoved it open. Stacks and stacks of forgotten things, enough to fill a lifetime, was what Clara had to tear through. Throwing aside old clothes, yellowed photographs, dusty books. "I can't believe I threw you away," she gasped out, breathless. "I can't believe I—" Her hands closed on another box. She ripped it open and stopped. The attic room was filled with scattered heirlooms and forgotten belongings, but Clara saw none of it. Her entire world had narrowed to the wooden figure nestled in tissue paper. With trembling hands, the same tenderness that Saren had shown when tending her wound, Clara lifted the Nutcracker out of the box. He was dusty and discarded. His paint faded in places, but thankfully, blessedly, intact. "Thank heavens," she breathed, hugging the toy to her chest. Suddenly, she was 12 years old again, standing in a candy forest with wonder in her eyes. And there was Saren, looking at her with such kindness it made her chest ache. He took a knee before her, bringing himself to her height. "I've been looking for you," he said softly. Young Clara giggled, bashful and delighted. "Really? For me? For you?" His smile was gentle, patient. "Keep the Nutcracker safe," Saren said, touching her cheek gently. "Keep him close, and I'll find you again." "I will," she promised. "I'll keep him forever." The memory shifted and she was back in the attic. The cold was so intense that the tears streaming down her cheeks felt like they were freezing to her skin. "I'm sorry I forgot," Clara sobbed, clutching the Nutcracker tighter. "I remember everything now. I remember you." A creak of floorboards cut her off, making Clara startle. Philip and Pippet stood in the attic doorway, their faces set with grim determination. "Hello, darling," Philip said, lips curved in a cold smile. Clara rose to her bare, frozen feet, her heart hammering. "How did you find me?" she asked, making Pippet roll her eyes. "We followed you here, obviously," she said, stepping further into the attic. "Did you think we'd let you just walk out of that house? We wanted you to run, wanted you to lead us straight to the king." "It was a trap," Clara whispered, horror dawning. "You knew I was listening. You knew I'd go find him." She'd been such a fool, so desperate to prove she wasn't insane that she'd played right into their hands. "Give us the Nutcracker, Clara," Pippat snapped. "We will spare you." They stepped forward. The floorboards creaked ominously beneath their weight. Clara took in Philip's face, the man she'd almost married, who she'd been so grateful would overlook her troubled past. "For a mouse," she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite her terror. "You're not very quiet," Philip's expression twisted with venom. "My love, you are quite insane, seeing enemies all around you." He took another step closer. "Come with me now while you still can before you hurt yourself." The implication was clear. The institution, the locked doors. A few days ago, that threat would have worked. But Clara's thoughts were clearer than they'd been in 20 years. She knew herself now, knew what was real and what wasn't, knew that she'd been right all along. "You don't scare me," she said, rising. "It may have worked when I was younger, when I was foolish enough to doubt myself. But I know who I am now." For a moment, nothing happened. Pippet and Philip simply stared at her. Then Pippet laughed, a cold, cruel sound. and Philip transformed in a blur of motion, his body contorting grotesquely halfway between man and mouse, his teeth elongated into yellow fangs, his fingers curved into claws. He lunged at Clara with inhuman speed. She tried to dodge, but he was too fast. But his clawed hand caught her wrist, twisting viciously. The Nutcracker tumbled from her grasp. "No!" Clara dove for it, but Philip kicked it away, sending it skittering across the attic floor toward Pirlipat. The princess bent down to examine it with cold satisfaction. "Finally," she mused, triumphant. "Finally, my torment ends." Clara struggled against Philip's grip, his claws digging into her shoulders. "Please," she gasped, staring at the Nutcracker in Pirlifat's hands. "Please don't." "Don't what?" Pipette's smile was vicious. She raised the Nutcracker high above her head and smashed it against the floor with all her strength. "No." Clara's scream tore from her throat, raw and agonized. Propet brought her heel down on the broken toy. "Please don't," Clara begged. Pipet smirked and pressed down her heel, grinding the toy beneath her shoe. Wood splintered, paint chipped away. "There," Pipet said with satisfaction. "Now it's truly over." The Nutcracker had been shattered into pieces. Clara's heart sank, taking it all in. When Philip released her, she collapsed onto the floor, crawling desperately toward the broken pieces. Her hands shook as she gathered them. An arm here, a leg there, and his head cracked, but still recognizable. "Enjoy what's left of him, Clara," Pipet cooed mockingly. She and Philip stood back, victorious. They'd won. The Nutcracker was destroyed. There was no threat left. They moved toward the attic door, already dismissing Clara as no longer relevant. Meanwhile, Clara clutched her head to her chest, sobbing. "I'm so sorry," she whispered to the broken toy. "I'm so sorry I didn't wait for you. I'm sorry I lost faith." Her voice broke on a sob. "I was so scared of being broken again, so terrified that if I believed in you, in us, they'd lock me away forever. But I should have trusted myself. I should have trusted our love." She pressed the wooden head against her heart. "I don't care that you're in pieces or that you're gone. I will love you fully for the rest of my life, Soren. You are my soulmate. You belong to me, and I belong to you. Broken or whole, alive or wood, I am yours always." The words came from the deepest part of her soul. A simple truth she'd finally accepted. "I believe in you," she whispered. "Forever." For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the wooden head in her hands began to glow. Light burst from the broken pieces. Brilliant, blinding, beautiful. The shards of wood flew from Clara's hands, spinning through the air, drawn together by invisible threads of magic. Pipet and Philip spun around, their faces contorting with horror. "No!" Pipet shrieked. The pieces of the Nutcracker swirled together in a tornado of light and power. They didn't just reform. They transformed, growing, expanding, becoming real. And then Soren stood before Clara in all his glory, even taller and more powerful than she'd ever seen him. His eyes blazed blue fire. His presence filled the room like a force of nature. He turned to Clara first. "My love," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Even when I was broken and destroyed, you claimed me." "Of course I did," Clara whispered. "Did you ever doubt I would?" Soren's smile was radiant. "Not for a second," he said. Then his expression hardened as he turned toward Pirlit and Philip. The Mouse King lunged at Soren in his grotesque, half-transformed state, all teeth and claws and desperate rage. But Philip was no match for Soren now. The fight was brief and brutal. Soren moved with devastating precision. Within seconds, he had Philip by the throat. Clara heard his body hit the snow-covered ground far below with a sickening final thud. Then an ungodly scream filled the attic. Clara and Soren both turned to see Pirrit transforming, but not into a mouse, into something far worse. Her skin was hardening, turning brown and grainy. Wood. She was becoming wood. Her beautiful features froze in an expression of terror and rage as her flesh solidified into carved lines. The curse was returning to its original host. "My king," Pearlie gasped, her voice strangled as her throat began to stiffen. "Help me, please." But Sauron regarded the cursed princess with cool detachment. He'd learned his lesson about misplaced honor. "You made your choice centuries ago," he said quietly. "Now live with it." Pipot's screams were cut off as her lips solidified into painted wood. Her eyes went glassy and fixed. Her body locked into the rigid pose of a disproportioned, horrifying Nutcracker doll. Clara fell to the floor, the world spinning. The curse was complete. The circle was closed. "My Clara," she heard Sauron say, "the curse is broken, and the world needs to rearrange itself. But fear not. I shall find you when it is done. No matter what happens, you are mine and I am yours." She heard him say that, and then Clara knew nothing more. Epilogue. When Clara's eyes blinked open and she saw familiar floral wallpaper. For a heart-topping moment, she thought it was all a dream. The attic, the confrontation. Sauron bursting free from the curse. Her chest tightened with grief so profound, it felt like drowning. But then she heard a commotion downstairs that pulled her from her moment of despair. Voices, her mother's high and fluttering with nervousness. And then words that made Clara's breath catch. "Your Majesty, we're honored by your presence. It's been so long since we've heard anything from your kingdom. Your Majesty." This time, Clara didn't creep down the stairs with her heart in her throat. She ran, not caring that she was in her night dress, hair wild and uncombed. Clara flew down the staircase, but she stopped short at the bottom step when she caught sight of him. Sauron stood in her family's modest parlor, and he was magnificent. He wore full royal regalia with the same easy confidence he wore everything else, natural as breathing. Her father stood slack-jawed, staring at the king like he'd walked out of a storybook. Her mother was scrambling for conversation, her hands fluttering nervously. "King Sauron, your kingdom. We've all been so relieved to hear that the troubles have been resolved," she said. Clara frowned confused, but then her mind adjusted, and she understood. When the curse broke, it had lifted from everyone's minds too, and now the whole world would remember that Sauron's powerful kingdom had always existed. The lost years were somehow restored to collective memory, the curse's eraser undone. Clara. Sauron's eyes found hers, and everything else ceased to matter. Clara's mother's mouth opened as if to offer some reproach for Clara appearing before royalty in her nightgown, but the sheer radiance of Sauron's expression stopped her short. Pure joy blazed across his features, unguarded, overwhelming, beautiful. Sauron crossed the room to Clara in 3 long strides and bowed before her. Not a slight inclination of his head, but a deep, reverent bow that made her father gasp audibly. Suppressing a smile, Clara aimed to drop into a curtsy, but Sauron caught her chin gently with his forefinger and lifted her face to meet his gaze. "I owe you everything," he said, his voice warm and adoring and pitched to carry through the parlor. "I want to say thank you, not only for me, but for everyone in my entire kingdom. We're free because of your bravery, Clara." Clara felt heat bloom in her cheeks. Meanwhile, the room was thick with shocked silence. "Our Clara," her mother whispered as if she couldn't quite believe what she was witnessing. Sauron's eyes never left Clara's face. "She's not your Clara anymore," he said. "In fact, for the past 20 years, she's been mine." He took her hand in both of his, cradling it like something precious. "Clara," he said, his voice resonating with emotion, "it was never the right time for us before. You were too young. I was too trapped. I have loved you across centuries and lifetimes, and I will love you until the stars burn out. I beg you, please be my wife." Distantly, Clara heard her father whisper, "This is insane. He's as insane as she is." But Clara couldn't bring herself to feel vindictive or bitter. The proof of her sanity, the validation of everything she'd always known, She didn't need it. Yes. The word burst from her joyful and certain, her eyes brimming with happy tears. I've been yours since I was 12 years old. I've always been yours. No sooner had the word left her mouth than Soren swept her off her feet, lifting her into his arms like she weighed nothing. Apologies, he said, turning to her parents. But I'm about to steal your daughter. Clara placed her palm against his cheek. You can't steal what is already yours, she whispered. Soren's answering grin was pure Christmas joy, warm and bright and full of promise. He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and absolutely improper for a parlor. And Clara was filled with light. Behind them, church bells rang out across the town, calling the faithful to Christmas morning service. But Clara and Soren had already found everything they needed to believe in each other. Clara reached the bottom of the stairs just as the front doors opened. Cold winter air swept into the house, carrying snow, pine, and something else, something impossibly familiar. Her heart stuttered, then began to race. A man stood in the doorway. He was dressed in dark finery trimmed with silver thread, a crown of winter-forged metal resting upon his dark hair. Snow clung to his shoulders like a blessing, rather than a burden. He filled the doorway not just with his presence, but with certainty, the kind that bent the world around him. Soren. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Her mother curtsied stiffly, clearly overwhelmed. Your Majesty, we... Soren didn't look at her. He didn't look at anyone except Clara. His blue eyes, those impossible winter sky eyes, found her across the room, and everything else ceased to exist. The years of doubt, the locked doors, the voices that told her she was broken. All of it fell away under the weight of his gaze. There was no question in his expression now, no desperation, only devotion. Clara, he said softly, but the sound carried rich and sure. I promised I would find you. Her breath hitched. Tears blurred her vision, but she didn't bother stopping them. She took one step forward, then another, and then she was running. She didn't care who watched. Soren crossed the room in 3 long strides and caught her before she could slow, his arms closing around her with a solidity that stole the air from her lungs. He held her like something precious, something claimed, one hand cradling the back of her head as if he feared the world might still try to take her from him. She laughed through her sobs, burying her face against his chest. You came, she whispered, voice shaking. I was so afraid. I know, he murmured, pressing his forehead to hers. And you still chose me, even when you thought I was gone, even when believing in me hurt you. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his gloved thumb brushing away her tears with infinite care. That is not madness, my love. That is courage. The room was silent. No one dared interrupt. Clara looked up at him, really looked, and felt something inside her settle at last. No fear, no doubt, just truth. I remember everything now, she said. The kingdom, the promise, you. His breath caught. Then say it, he whispered. Not because fate demands it, not because magic binds us, only because it's what you choose. Clara smiled, a real smile, unafraid and unashamed. I choose you, she said. I always did. The world seemed to exhale. Outside, the snow shifted. Somewhere far beyond the walls of the house, magic rippled outward. Candy forests warming into sunlight, toy soldiers blinking into life, a kingdom waking from centuries of stillness. Soren bowed his head briefly, reverently, then lifted it again, his voice steady and proud. Then let it be known, he said, loud enough now for all to hear, that Clara of this world is Clara of mine, queen of the winter-bound realm, my mate, my equal, my home. He took her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, gentle, reverent, absolute. And for the first time in her life, Clara did not feel strange, or broken, or wrong. She felt chosen. Together, they stepped forward, out of the house, into the falling snow, into a future no one would ever take from her again. Because fairy tales were real, and this one had waited 20 years to come true. The end. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed listening to this story, please hit the like button, share it with someone who would love it, and subscribe to Nightbond Narratives. And don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss what's coming next. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me which part of the world you're watching from and which part of the story you liked the most. Creating a full-length audiobook video takes a lot of time and effort, so if you notice any small ambiguities, please be kind and forgive them. Your support truly means the world and motivates me to keep bringing you more stories. Thank you for listening all the way through. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, hitting that like button really helps the channel grow. And now, I want to hear from you. What was your favorite moment of justice or drama in the story? Until next time, stay warm and keep enjoying the tales of Nightbond Narratives.